The next problem-solving tip that we're going to work on is called reduce the clutter. Word problems are full of words, and that's partly why you all struggle with them sometimes, is that there's a lot going on in a word problem sometimes, and it gets really hard to sort out what's important. So what we're suggesting here is that you look at the whole word problem and see if you can just boil it down to the material that's really necessary mathematically to solve this problem. So it says some of them are just clutter. I think we have to be a little bit careful about how we think about that. So what we mean by clutter is things that don't help you actually solve the problem. So sometimes the details help you understand what's going on in the problem, help you see the context, but aren't really necessary for solving the problem. So what we're suggesting here is look for what's important, what's not, cross out the extra details. So when you're starting with this, you can actually physically cross out the stuff you don't like, that you don't think you need, to help you simplify working on the problem. So this is particularly good for really long word problems. We had one the other day that was a long paragraph, and a lot of it was necessary to set up the problem, but then once we understood what was going on, we didn't need very much of that information. So this tip is telling you to get rid of everything that isn't mathematically important. And just in case you wonder, so why do these math teachers put all these words in there to begin with? Well, because word problems are our way of, in class, solving problems that are more like what you might see in some application problem later on in life if you're in business or economics or science and you're trying to use math to solve a problem. The world doesn't present you with a nice, neat little problem like 2x minus 4 equals 12. Rarely do you have that to work on, something that you can do just step by step. So what the world typically does is presents you with an enormous amount of information, and in order to figure out what you're trying to figure out, you have to decide out of all that information, what do you need and what do you not need to solve your problem. So it's not just us trying to mess with you. Okay, so the first thing to do when you're doing reduce clutter is read the whole word problem and make sure you understand the situation being described. Because remember, we're not saying that the other words are not necessary at all. They just might not be necessary to actually solve the problem, but they might help you figure out what's going on. So here we go. Paul's mother is sick of storing his vinyl LP record collection and has decided to ship it to him in Washington. She checks online, finds that she can just fit the collection into 9 large shipping boxes. But when she goes to her local shipping store, they only have 7 of the large boxes. So she purchases those 7 and 1 extra large box to hold the remaining 22 LP records. And the question asks how many LP records will fit into a large shipping box, and then how many records are in Paul's record collection. So we're working on reducing clutter here. This is a long problem. What we want to do is think about what in here looks like it's mathematically necessary and what isn't. So I want you to think about that for a second, and for yourself, try this. So reread the whole problem and try to think about crossing out what's not really necessary mathematically to solve the problem. You're not trying to solve the problem. You're just trying to sort out which information is necessary, which information is not. So pause the video and try doing that for yourself before you continue. So I'm going to show you what I did with this. Remember, when I show you what I did, doesn't mean yours needs to be exactly like mine. There's not a perfect right or wrong answer to this. there are some wrong answers. You could potentially have crossed out some things that really are necessary to solve the problem. But remember, you're practicing this. So if you do that wrong a couple of times, don't worry about it. You're in the process of practicing this, trying to get better at it. And I'm not saying that my version is perfect either. So here's what I did to reduce clutter. I said, I don't care that Paul's mother is sick. Not that I'm heartless, but that doesn't help us solve the problem. Or that she's sick of storing his vinyl record collection. I don't, that's not necessary. I don't need to know why she's shipping the stuff. And she's decided to ship to in Washington. We don't care that it's in Washington. She checks online and finds that. We don't care about how she figured this out. But then we start hitting some information that is necessary. She can just fit the collection into 9 large shipping boxes. So that is a useful information. And remember, when you're starting out reducing clutter, you should probably go with being conservative about what you cross out. Cross out stuff that it's really obvious is not necessary. So the next thing is like that when she goes to her local shipping store. Don't care where she's getting the boxes. So this process is not going to get you the equation. This process helps you be less intimidated by a long problem by basically shortening it a little bit so that you can distill down to the information that's necessary, because we find that students are intimidated by long, drawn-out word problems. So you're not doing this process. It doesn't get us to an equation. It gets us to the point where we can use some of the other techniques to get an equation. So I want to be clear about that one. This one does not get you an equation. But on this one, we used reduce the clutter already. So we're ready to try to get the equation. And then to go on from here, I would recommend using visualizing the problem. Now that's only because I'm a visual sort of person. But when I try to think about this, I have to draw out my 7 large boxes and my extra large box. And I have to try to think that way to think about how to answer the question and get the equation for this. I'm not going to do that part because we already did a visualize the problem. But I'm just saying reduce the clutter gets you to the point where you can use one of the other techniques or use your own technique to finish writing the equation. So I want to remind you of a few things. Remember that when you approach word problems, these are just some strategies that some experts that solve word problems all the time have said might be helpful to you. Different people are going to choose different equally effective approaches to the same problem. So if you take 4 or 5 really good mathematicians and you have them approach the same problem, they're likely to come up with 5 different ways to do it. And some of those approaches will be very creative, and you may come up with that too. So don't try to get the same approach as anybody else. And then just keep in mind the stuff about reading it several times, being willing to read a word problem over again if you don't understand it. Try not to get frustrated when you read it. Just read it again. Persist, be resourceful, give it a rest. If you're really struggling with a word problem, either give the whole thing a rest or just go on to the next word problem. The next word problem might be quite a bit easier for you for whatever reason. Then you can come back to the one that you were stressing about. And then just keep in mind all the steps for solving word problems. We were focusing in these videos about defining the variable and writing an equation. But when you do these, you do need to finish up with the rest. You have to solve the equation, check the answer twice, and answer in a sentence. So don't forget that we do expect you to finish out the process. In these videos, we're just talking about these techniques for doing the variable and the equation, really for writing the equation.